Welcome back to XYZ. It's Ben here, and before Chris and Elmeen join, I just want to provide a little bit of color on this next episode. We're going to be focusing around our very first job in our career. And so all three of us are actually software developers by trade. Chris obviously is the most experienced. I've got about a decade behind me. And then Elmeen actually just entered the market just a few months ago. And so we're largely going to be talking around landing the very first job, sort of the footwork that we had to put in to get it, as well as the cultural things that you had to participate in, whether at the interview or on the very first day. So let's get into it.
So when I first was interviewing for my real job for development after college, it was job market was pretty tough, and unemployment was really high. So and everything was back then, 1992. It was much more conservative than it is now. Of course, you got more of the sense that the employers were kind of like, well, hey, we're doing you a favor by giving you a job and you're lucky to have one. It was definitely that kind of atmosphere, which I don't think is as much of the case today. But when the interview process, there was no internet, there was no email, there was, to find a job, one of the main places you look for a job was the back of the paper, the want ads. That's where you went. Luckily I was at a college that had a person whose job was to place you. And so a lot of the interviews I had he helped set up. So I was lucky in that. But other people, like I'd say the people at Iowa State and some of the other universities around here, you had to either go to a job fair or you had to go to the company and look for their listings or the back of the paper. Like I said, that was pretty much how you did a job search. It was painful.
My very first job coming out of college was by word of mouth. And at this time it was 2015. So it had already kind of shifted. But before I'd gone to college, it was, you got to print off a resume and go and hand it in, walk into these companies, that is not the industry that I entered at all.
Yeah, for me, it was completely different than you guys. I guess Ben's way closer. A lot of LinkedIn grinding, a lot of making sure that you're searching all these companies. Most kids had like a spreadsheet of like jobs they were applying to. I think I applied to like 400 places to find a full-time job after college. Ended up just networking my way to a job. But especially for like internships and stuff, it was just every single day on LinkedIn, like while you're in class, like half the classes on LinkedIn, looking at the jobs, like filtering, messaging out to alumni, and then every single job you apply to, you just get so like, I'm never gonna get this. You see like, oh, it's like LinkedIn has a stat where it's like 600 people clicked apply or like 700 people apply to this job. I'm like, really? How am I gonna get this? So for me, it was just like cast my resume to as many places as I can and then see who gets back to me.
Yeah, that's wild. Because I was thinking, you said a spreadsheet is how you guys were tracking it. And then, of course, like I said, in my day, it was all paper when I started. So we had our binders, my classmates, we had these binders, and you would make a copy of whatever you sent to the company, because you had to have your resume with a cover letter, and usually references we didn't include. We said like ask for references, but we had a cover letter that was specific for that position we were applying for to that, that company, and your resume. And you would print off a copy of that and put that in your binder under company A, whoever you were applying for. And then like a little snippet of the job you were applying for from the newspaper or whatever. And then you would hope that, a week or two later, you would get a letter by snail mail back from them. And then, so we had our, our binders with our rejection letters and everything else.
What was like the feeling on like cover letters and stuff back then? Because I feel it's like kind of fallen out, a bit, especially, like Almeen saying, like there's so many like fake job postings and stuff now where it's like, if I'm doing a cover letter for each one of them, like I'm not going to be able to apply for 400 jobs, so like what was the vibe back then?
Yeah, back then, it was really, hey, your resume was more generic, but your cover letter was supposed to say, hey, this job that you've got, I'm good for this because I'm going to highlight what's on my resume or add a little bit to it in this cover letter, like specific to that job. And it was kind of considered like a must have then. Yeah,
Interesting.
you had to have that.
So speaking of resumes and cover letter, how did you like make all of this? So when I was first doing this, I made my first resume in Microsoft Word, and that was high tech in 2009, 2010 when I first made one. But now it's a lot of folks probably are just using a resume builder site or some sort of software or something. But how did you do it back then?
Yeah, when I first started in the late 80s, I think I mentioned this before. Nobody really had a personal computer. You had to go to a lab at the college, and they were either all mainframes or you could fight over the PCs. So at first, I had a typewriter in my room, and that's how I made my first resumes. Was just on, and it was a somewhat more sophisticated typewriter. It wasn't like clickety clack. It was. It could do different fonts and things, and you could see like it had
Oh
like
wow.
one line of text you could proofread before you pushed enter and stuff like that. It was like, ooh, I thought I was fancy. But that's how I did the first resume. But then by the time...
would you have to like type every single one up, or could you like repeat?
You could... This one... I think the last one I had, the last typewriter had, could save an entire document in its memory, and you could push print again. But I think most of the time I just ended up taking it to the copier at the library and just doing it that way. It was just faster. Yeah. But
Were
then...
you worried?
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, were you worried about like your resume format and like how optimized every single like bullet point was?
Oh, yeah. And, when I first... I don't know if I told you guys this, but I actually have 2 degrees. I was on the 7-year program. I went for 5 years as business, and then along the way, I discovered programming during that time, and then went back for 2 years to get my programming degree. But somewhere in that process, we actually had a required class on, I can't remember what it was called, but it was a job search program or class. I don't know if you guys had anything like that.
No.
I had like 1 credit. It was called like career class. It was like software engineering careers, and it was like that, but it was like pretty bad advice for. It's kind of outdated.
Yeah, I guess now that I recall, yeah, I think I had one too, and yeah, I think it was very old school too.
Well, I think I had one the first time around that was like that. It was 1 credit, like just a waste of time. But then when I went back and got my programming degree, they were very serious about it. They tried to get 100% placement. That was one of their selling points. So they really wanted you to do a good job. So back to your question, Elmine, they graded you. They made you write a resume, and they would grade you and then like cross out and, like correct everything you did. So yeah, it was very... by the time I got done with that, I felt like I had it pretty fine tuned. But yeah, for sure, it was every bullet point was streamlined, and you were supposed to put certain keywords or omit certain words. And yeah, it was a very strict class. And by the time I came out of there, I felt good about what I had. Now, if I looked at it today, it'd probably be a joke. But
I feel like today there's a little more like personification on the resumes themselves. Like it's not just like raw, I guess, stats. It's a little more, it seems like you're sort of selling like yourself versus like what you can provide, extract like the most value out of you. I guess like was it very strict back then? It was, here's exactly the experience I have. You're hiring like a robot. You're not hiring me, Chris Snook, the human, being and all that means.
Yeah, it was supposed to be very brief. It's like 2 pages were frowned upon. It was 1 page of just the highlights of I do COBOL, CICS, JCL, and I had this GPA, and I worked at these 3 places, and that all squeezed into 1 page. And it was more like the robot thing. It didn't say anything about your personality or likes, dislike, anything like that.
So
that's what mine was like too.
What about extracurriculars? On mine, I put, hey, I was a Boy Scout. When I was first entering, I didn't have anything. So did you do stuff like that? Or was the expectation was like, you should have had a job, kid?
Yeah, yeah. I was told not to put unless it was relevant. Like if your extracurricular was, hey, I was in the .NET users group for something like that. Otherwise you weren't supposed to put it on there. Was the thinking at the time. Unless you were really just trying to fill up that one page, you were just really struggling.
Sure.
I think I did end up putting some awards on there, which that would be ridiculous now, but I got like some awards for programming in college or something. So it's embarrassing now to look at that kind of thing, but you hadn't had a programming job yet. So yeah.
Those are so relevant. A lot of kids put like, I won this hackathon in the class, or it's like very common. It's like, there's a class at Iowa State where you make an Android app, and if you win like best app, I've seen kids put that on their resume too. So like, that's still pretty common, I'd say now.
My very first interview for my real jobs, I'll set the stage. I was doing help desk at the company I was applying actually to be a developer at, and my interview actually was zero coding at that. Believe it or not, I actually just got in there. They kind of took me through. It was almost like a personality test. They liked me and then hired me, but because I was working help desk and I guess they thought I did really good. They kept stringing me along like it was 2 months. And they're like, oh, like, you got the job, but we just need you here until we can backfill you. They just could not find a
They
backfill.
couldn't let go.
Yeah, and then I actually Polk County ended up having which is our local county here, ended up having an opening, and that's where Jim worked, my brother, and the pay was it was a lot more. And so I applied over there. And so I get into there, and it was kind of a personality test. It was just a single interview. And then we also had some very basic coding questions too. But, I'd say largely they didn't bust my balls or anything. Neither interview really bust my balls. It was not, I'm sure Elmine will go into it, but this LeetCode driven crap type of thing either. But I didn't apply to like a ton of places. It was probably like 3 or 4. And 2 of them were, of course, the one I got, and then Polk County, which I ended up taking instead, and leaving them hanging dry. So
yeah. So for me, the interview for the first job I got, and now I just want to say for context that my experience was probably a little bit unique because it was mostly focused on more data processing, on the mainframe for that kind of thing. So my interview would have probably gone a lot differently than like say a C programmer or something like that if you were doing that. Just from what I've heard from other people that I knew that graduated around that time. But there was a written test. It was more like, like take your number 2 pencil, fill in the blank kind of thing. But it was it was all specific to COBOL. And it was really just a breeze. Really, it was because back in those days, I don't want to get too far sidetracked, but before we had Stack Overflow and all this stuff, there was like one. If you were a COBOL programmer, there was like the 1974 version of COBOL that pretty much everybody was using, and it didn't change. And you just had to memorize everything in the language. It was memorization, is really what it was, and that's what helped get you in the door. So we had that coding test to make sure that you knew COBOL, and once you passed that, then you went in, and like you said, it was more like the personality kind of test. And the only like developer centric questions they really asked, I would say more around documentation. That was a huge thing back then. It was like, yeah, but can you document? Can you document what you did? Yeah, it's like, this is ridiculous now, but like flow charts and everything, because a lot of the older generation, I think they didn't want to do any of that kind of stuff. Hey, I wrote this program. I'm not going to like bother to like write down what it did or anything. And that was huge when I was coming up. It was like, we expect you to write documents on what you just built so that other people can understand it later. So that seemed like more their concern, that and the personality, really.
Yeah, for me, but like for full time, I'll set the stage. It's July. The current internship I was at, I did not want to go back to for like the full time offer, and then so I started looking for jobs. But at the same time, as Ben was saying, we're doing these like LeetCode problems, which is just like they question you on these data structures and algorithms for computer science to see how much you know. So every single day I was trying to grind those problems out, on the websites, just trying to practice as much as I can, applying to jobs. And then what the process was for most places was you get like a take-home test. The take-home test is usually like a medium to a hard problem of that, and it's like 2 or 3 problems they give you. And if you don't ace that completely, you don't move on to the next step. And it used to be, from what I've heard, was like, oh yeah, you can miss like some questions here and there. So that's kind of what I did. I was like, got like 80%, like 90%, never like really aced any of them. But just how competitive the market's gotten, it's like you have to ace it or not. So other places I've done where, for the role I got now, is the first call was just like a video call. We talked about like, hey, like tell me about your experience, like went through a resume, talked about like what I'd like to do for like software development. And then the second one was like in person. I had two questions. The first question was sort of like a LeetCode question, but a lot more basic, like a super easy one, just to see if I knew like basic computer science stuff. And then the second one was a system design one, where I had to go in and like draw on a whiteboard about like how I would design a basic like CRUD app. So like, oh, here's a database, and then we'll have this and stuff like that. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. Just
For
super
anyone who's
competitive.
unfamiliar, like LeetCode is like this almost like a test around like algorithms and stuff like that, with the like focused with code as well.
Yeah, and it's really far away from what you do in your day-to-day job. So there's a
Yeah,
big gripe around that.
right, and so that's like so disappointing, because when I entered the job market, not even that long ago, at least I never applied at Facebook or Microsoft at the time, anything like that, but like it just wasn't like that. And maybe there was like whiteboarding sessions that would kind of go out like that, but it was go out to this website, like you don't even talk to anybody beforehand, and it's just like do this thing. It's like, I mean, you it's so like unpersonal, and you just don't have a chance at all. It's just it's purely like statistical and like mathematical, like whether you make it in or not. It has nothing to do with like your aptitude or your acuity or anything like that. It's insane, like having applied to jobs even recently. Like it is insane how different it is now.
Yeah, it's a lot of developers are like, I want to switch jobs, so now I gotta like kind of slack off at work and then start focusing on how to interview. So I gotta reteach myself all these like interview problems, and it's come to the point where before it used to be like totally fine to ask a LeetCode problem because the easy ones are really basic. Any developer can do them, and it's just like, do you know the language? Do you know the syntax? But everyone can do those now. So they move to the medium problems. Most people can do those now. So now they're asking these hard problems, and no one can really do these within like 20, 30 minutes if it's your first time seeing it, unless like a select few people. So now it's just kind of like memorization at this point.
Yeah, it's just like coming to these things, and you get the meme is like reverse a binary tree, and like who even knows what that means. And then you get into the job, and it's like Kim in accounting wants you to change this button to red, and it's like that's the actual job. It's like I changed the button to red, like that is the actual job. It's like you almost have like these two separate like interviews. It's insane. Like I mean, I understand like the scale that like Amazon and Microsoft are like working in. There's certain sections of those companies that require like that, but for the rest of us, it's been like co-opted into these companies that are just looking for like a recipe, or something. It's like, oh, how do I hire good developers? And they're like, well, Facebook's doing this, and then it's like
statistics.
Yeah, right. And it's like all of a sudden my 10-man company is doing LeetCode because someone Googled how do I hire good developers.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys ever look into like why that happens or like why that started. I don't know if this is 100% true, but from doing research, it was Google was kind of like the main driver behind these like LeetCode problems. And I think the whole premise was, since a lot of them came from Stanford, the hardest class there in most colleges is data structures and algorithms. So they kind of got some problems from that class. I'm like, oh, if you can solve these problems from Stanford, obviously you can work at Google. So that kind of like trickled down to like what we have now.
I didn't know that. Well, I can honestly say in 32 years, I've never had to reverse a binary tree.
Yeah, I've had to like relearn like what that means, just because like it's just something
for interviews.
Yeah, right. It's just like I've had to learn like how to do that like 2 or 3 times, and now I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's like back in my day, it was bubble sort. Can you do a bubble sort? Draw that up and I used to know what that means, but I don't even know. I think I probably know, but I'm not sure. not a term I use in everyday, probably since I interviewed.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that. Like you were talking about, like back in the day, we had to memorize the entire language and know how to do everything because otherwise you'd have to go to like books and then like
Yeah.
look it up, and it would take forever.
Mhm.
And now it's like this complete shift to like, well, ChatGPT can just write the code now. Like
Right.
it's like it's weird. It's gone full like circle into like just generated for you. Supposedly. Obviously, for anyone unaware, it does not work.
It sucks.
It
Yeah.
sucks a lot, but that's sort of the headcanon that we're dealing with right now in our space, for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
you got people thinking, oh, yeah, I don't need 10 developers, just need one developer and a Copilot license, and they can code whatever they want. Chris, speaking of like everyday stuff, like what was your first day like? Your first dev job?
Yeah, it was a little disappointing. They forgot that I was coming. And so I walked in and I didn't have a computer or a desk. They were just like, "Well, you're coming today." But once that kind of got straightened out, I don't know. I don't think it was probably that much different than it would be today. It was just, you go around and you meet everybody and they take you out to lunch and then they sit you down and say, okay, why don't you go find this program out there and just read through it for the next 2 days until I have time to sit with you and tell you what to do.
Yeah, did you have like a huge ass desk?
Yeah, it was a full cube with walls and a big old mainframe terminal on it. Yep.
Wow. Like it's all like open concept today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like when I first started at Polk County, it was like we had like these really old timey desks, and like a couple of like the old guys like that had been there, 20, 30 years, just had 30 stacks of papers, and they had like shit
Mm.
pinned like all over the place, and then
Oh,
it's like all us like newer like younger guys literally had nothing. We were utilizing like 1% of the space.
that's funny you said that because I remember that now. It's like that was kind of like a mark of you being senior is how many stacks of paper you had on your
Yeah.
desk.
Yeah, now it's like I can just literally everyone just walks around with their laptops. That's sort of like your desk, everything compartmentalized inside there.
Now the biggest thing on your desk is like, it's so cool if you just have like one like mouse pad, wireless mechanical keyboard, and then like 3 monitors, and then you're a senior.
Yeah, like my first day was like super weird. So like everyone was like really nice, but like my boss was like socially weird. So like he did like the usual thing where he like takes you around the office, and shows you stuff. And like I'll set the stage. Like this office had like 4 rooms in it. There was like a conference room, which I'd already been in from the interview, and then like a main secretary area, and then there was the break room, and then the main open dev space. And that was it. And he's walking around and he's showing me all these things, and it was just kind of like a polite conversation and everything. And then I get to my desk and he's like, "Do you like water?" I was like,
Yeah.
and like I didn't know like what to say, because it was like I had so many thoughts. It was, well, I am in fact 70% approximately water, so I have to like water, but yeah, I like water. And he's like, "Oh, let me show you the drinking fountain." So we like walked over, which was like 10 feet away, and he like shows me this drinking fountain. And I was like, "All right, cool." Like there's the drinking fountain. But yeah, that kind of like set the stage for, I don't know, my relationship with him, and just kind of like the office's relationship with him. He's a really like innocent, nice person. That was just such a, I remember that to this day. Yeah, do you like water? Like, how wild.
Yeah. For me, my first day 3 months ago, let's say, brought me upstairs, showed me my desk. My laptop was there, which was actually, out of my 6 programming jobs I've had, only 2 of them I had got my laptop the first day. So that was pretty nice to have everything like running. Went through there, installed everything I needed to, set up all my accounts. But yeah, it was pretty normal after that. Just start programming right away. Like, here's your task. Let's pair program. Let me show you around. But yeah. One
How long
thing
did
my
it take you? How long did it take you, Chris, to get going on your first mainframe day?
You know, like my first project or my first.
Just how long did it take you to? I walk in the door and then I'm writing code, and it's like shifts to to live or something.
Yeah, I think it was a couple days before they would I think they weren't prepared for me. And so I think I just sat there like reading through some stuff, just trying to kind of figure out where things were for a couple days. Oh, and then the big thing I forgot to tell you guys was they told me, and I heard this from other people at the time, is that programmers are a dime a dozen. So what's going to set you apart is you getting to know the business. So what they did was my second week there. So I didn't program anything the first week. My second week, I started insurance underwriting class. We were required to go to the same class that underwriters were. And so I was in that for, I don't know, maybe a month or something like that before I was like, and I was just like, what have I done? I hate my life. I wanted to write code, not be an insurance person. So it was like probably a good month before I was allowed to like sit down and like actually start coding. Which was very disappointing to me, being right out of college and being all gung ho and everything. But then once I was let in, they gave me a project, and it was probably something very small, like, go change this word here, and then we'll show you how to deploy it. But yeah, and but that was very disappointing. It took me quite a while before I was actually in where I could make coding changes. Yeah.
That's crazy how we go from programmers are a dime a dozen to we need programmers, everyone please learn how to code, to
I know.
AI is going to take your job.
Well, and I mean, even in, so that was 1992. And by the time Y2K came around, was just like, 7 years later after that, then they were anybody with a heartbeat that could spell COBOL they were shoving in to code.
Yeah, the Y2K scare was wild. I remember sitting in my cousin's basement, and it was 1999, and we're watching the ball drop in New York, and everyone's like thinking that the lights are going to turn on, the whole grid's going to go down when the year switches over, and like the ball drops, and there's almost like this selective breath, and I feel like actual informed people like knew that it wasn't going to happen, but like that was not like anyone in my space when I was 9 years old at the time. Like it was a real fear, that like shit was just going to turn off when the clocks hit, January 1st, 2000.
Well, I would say that my thought on that is, if nobody had done anything, yeah, it might have been something on the level of the CrowdStrike thing that happened here recently, where, airlines weren't running or something. If nobody had done anything about Y2K, stuff would have stopped. Now, would we like all drop dead? No, but some things would have been broken. Flights might have been messed up for a while or something like that. But yeah, I don't think it was ever going to be the catastrophic thing that they were predicting. But
well, thanks for saving us, Chris. You're a real hero.
Don't thank me. Thank all those music majors who became programmers during Y2K. I think I mentioned this before, that my company and others at the time, there was this theory going around that if you took somebody who is a musician or a music major, they had an aptitude for programming. So they actually had, like, my company actually had a university that they called it university, and they would bring in those music majors and they would train them to be developers so that they could help with the Y2K problem.
Yeah, that's crazy. A few years ago, it's like, oh yeah, just here's this, give me $3,000 in 3 months of your time, I'll give you a boot camp. So things just keep going like back and forth, I guess.
To explain more like the Diamond Dozen in the 90s. Was that like an offshoring thing, or was that just like everyone was in it?
Nobody knew. Offshoring, I don't think we even heard that term that early on. It was really, and again, this might be more because it was the data processing for insurance and making all that stuff is now, I will say, whether that whole thing I said about memorizing COBOL, that was true. nobody wanted to read those IBM manuals because they're like super dry reading and they're like this thick. And nobody read those except for the super nerds that had to track down some obscure problem because there wasn't a lot to the language. I mean, it hadn't updated since 1974. There wasn't a lot of stuff to learn as you went on. I mean, you might got better at your job or learned other skills on the job, but there wasn't like, okay, I'm probably as good as going to be a COBOL programmer after the first year. I mean, that's so I think they thought, okay, you got COBOL down, so now we're going to train you on, you're going to be a good insurance programmer or a good banking programmer. That's the thing. And they wanted you to have certifications, the same ones that insurance agents or actuaries, or not actuaries, what am I trying to say? Adjusters would have. They would have you get those certifications, and that's how you would get your raise or your bonus is based off what insurance, banking certifications you had.
So it was more like programming is like the side job, and like insurance is the real job, right?
Right. And I was amazed. Yeah, I was amazed when I first started working too. Now I think, and I say this with love, I work with nerds. I mean, we're all pretty nerdy, right? I mean, you guys, that's who I pictured I was going to be working with. When I first started, I was working with people who really could care less about the programming part of it. I would say that those were maybe like 1 out of 20 or 30. The rest of the people were they could have done anything with their lives. They could have been insurance agents. They could have been attorneys, whatever. They just happened to pick programming. And it really wasn't like a passion. And they were like the furthest thing from a nerd you could imagine, really, in my mind. They were just.
Man, that is wild.
Yeah.
Like that is just so different than how it is today. It's like all of us grew up with, like Lord of the Rings and video games, or it's like I didn't choose programming chose me, like that type of thing. Like
differ a little bit. 2016, like 2019, a lot of these videos started coming out where it's like day in the life of a programmer. I make $200K. I live in San Francisco. I code for 2 hours, then I go do all this fun stuff in my office. So a lot of people that I went to college with and like some of the like interns and like new grads I worked with were just like, yeah, I don't really like programming. And I'm seeing them again, like sort of like burnt out and stuff. It's like, yeah, I just kind of do this for the money, and then I'll retire or switch careers later. So after this, I'm sort of realizing how like much we're coming back to Chris, like back in the 90s.
Isn't that crazy?
It's like different. Instead of it being like money based now versus like back then. I'm sure obviously it was money based back then, but like it was more like programming it seemed like it's like the side job, versus programming's not a full-time job. In order to be a good you really have to be an insurance agent that knows how to program, like that type of thing.
Right, for sure.
And now it's like the space is so complex. You're just talking about that CrowdStrike thing. There's so many components to shipping software that it's beyond a full-time job. I mean, it's turned into there's 25 roles for all of these things. It's gotten so complex now that it's like it just keeps expanding, and the roles that are required to cover all the bases.
Yeah, it's always great when you work with someone who's like really passionate. You can like kind of like really like geek, like nerd out with them when it comes to like programming and stuff. And then I guess nowadays, I don't know if you guys, actually kind of curious. I feel like now I need to have learned at least a few languages, have experiences, some frameworks. Good luck trying to get a job if you don't have an internship, and then really make sure that you have a few projects on your GitHub, like minimum. What was that like for you guys? Like, what was like the qualifications for, or like, what did you guys think you guys needed to have? Because I feel like now it's like I need like 5 years of experience to get a new grad role.
Yeah, at least when I was entering, it was nothing. It was very much, this is an entry level job. I'm an entry level person. We can teach you. So I totally get that though. I see that today. For sure.
Yeah, I feel like coming in with the qualifications, I had kind of a leg up because the college that I went to was very tailored towards getting a job at Principal in downtown Des Moines. Like 3/4 of my instructors were ex-Principal employees. And it was all it's like, we are going to teach you exactly what you need to know the first day. And I was lucky in that regard because I knew everything. And meanwhile, I was working besides Iowa State grads who were, computer science, and they had more of a well-rounded thing, and they knew, a lot more stuff. They knew C or, and all this stuff better than I did, but they had no idea what JCL was. They'd never programmed in COBOL before, and they were struggling. So I think, by the time I got done with my my adjusters class and I could actually start coding, I felt like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. Just tell me where the stuff is and I'll do it. So I felt good about that. But yeah, definitely I was lucky in that regard.
Was it also like that very first job, like when you came in, was it like this big sense of loyalty and everything like that too?
Yeah, for sure. That was a huge thing. And it was I would say overall, it was very conservative. You were expected to work longer hours. You're just like, well, okay, you can work. It's kind of like that Office Space where he's like, well, how many pieces of flair do you need? It's like, well, okay, so I can work 8 hours. Well, if that's what you want to do is work 8 hours. It's like, but John over there, he's going places and he puts in 10 hours, so it depends on, yeah. But, so for sure there was the whole loyalty thing. And it was, again, I think I mentioned earlier, it was like, we have graciously given you this job. You're lucky to have it. So don't screw up. Don't look at us sideways or you will be on the street and it's hard to find a job out there. If that was your question.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Because I feel it is very, I mean, even just outside of programming, I feel it's very much turned on its head today. There's very much and especially post-COVID, like a worker empowerment, movement, where it's like, I am a human beyond this job. And like, so when I'm on the job, I am still a human being that deserves respect and has rights.
Yeah. For me, it was like coming into college was, even the professors were talking about it, and like anyone you were talking about, so yeah, you're gonna get a job in software engineering, you'll be there for like 1 to 2 years, then you'll job hop because they won't give you a raise, they won't pay you enough, they won't value what you're worth, and then you keep doing that eventually till you can't do it anymore, and then you'll probably just kind of chill out. But now I feel we could be going back to that where it's like, oh my god, there's layoffs happening, I don't know what's going to happen, I'm going to work really, really hard, and I'm just going to wait in just in case. But I think still right now that's still there. It's like, yeah, I'm still going to job hop because zero company loyalty. Companies can just lay me off whenever. I feel like we've gone through so many of these so far. Like there's like a disconnect between that.
Yeah, like, I mean, I'll say I am definitely the poster child of job hopping. I did anywhere from like 6 months to 2 years. And I think my current role is the longest I've ever been somewhere in my career, coming up on 3 years. It's completely opposite of what my parents did and taught to expounded upon me is, oh, you got to be loyal and they'll be loyal back. And it's like, I found that to be a complete and utter lie.
Yeah.
Well, your pension, Ben, you look at your pension.
Yeah, right. And me personally, I haven't been a victim of layoffs or anything, but it's like, my coworkers, I get very attached, to folks that I work with and everything. They're my friends and people that I more or less fall in love in a platonic way. But it's too, and it's very much not like I just go to a job to collect a paycheck. So
that is like the thing. It's like you're with people like 8 hours a day. Like that's also like really important too. I know Chris said you didn't. Ben, did you ever have a programming internship at all, or did either of you guys? Internships, I guess.
Oh god, my internship was so terrible. So like it was a programming internship, but like they literally just left me by myself to do garbage. Basically, I just created like garbage for them. I was creating like some automation to like walk through these web pages. It was for an insurance company and just like walk through like, checking out insurance. Like someone's buying insurance, and I literally just wrote like a sort of a robot that would like walk through the screens and make sure that I could like click all the buttons and stuff. I actually had this, speaking of like offshoring, I had this guy from India. I didn't like him at the time, but like looking back on it, like that dude was like trying his best, but he was a contractor too. But like I had this meeting with him one time, and we got in there and he was looking at like my code, and like he was the only feedback that I had, for 3 months. And it was like 2 months into it, and I'd been all by myself. And like we get into this meeting, and he looks at my stuff and he goes, "This is the worst thing I have ever seen." And like at the time I was like completely like devastated,
Crushed.
and I literally go, "What?" And he like corrected himself, because and this is all like me putting my tinfoil hat on, but like I feel like he felt like he had to then like correct himself and be like politically correct, and he's like, "Oh no, I mean it's good," and looking back on that moment, it was such like a powerful moment for me, even though he like walked back and did the frankly the wrong thing, but obviously the politically correct thing, but like it was such like a good thing for me, because like I'd literally sat in my cube and done this thing for 2 months and wrote all this code that was complete crap, and like finally this guy had the balls, even though he was a contractor and had no thing, he'd finally like told me that it was complete garbage. And like that was such like an eye-opening thing for me, even though he walked it back, and like it did like at the time like leave me like kind of questioning like what his actual feedback was, but like looking back on it, it was like it was complete crap, and like he absolutely should have like skewered me for it, and he should not have walked it back. So if you're listening, dear sir, you're totally right.
I didn't really have an internship per se, but I had a summer job right before that was at in an IT department that was kind of acted like an internship. And I will tell you, I will never ever do IT for a bank. I know it was a long time ago, but I can't imagine things have changed that much. Those people hated their lives. There was so much stress. I don't know how many times I would leave for the day, say, "Goodbye, Paul, see you tomorrow," and come in the morning, and Paul was still there in the same clothes. He had been there all night going through data dumps, trying to figure out why the nightly job didn't run, so people's bank accounts got their deposits and everything. It was so stressful. Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
But
Wow.
it was interesting, but that, it was more or less, I was mostly in the computer operations area where you loaded the tapes and that kind of stuff. So one of the computer operators was named Connie, and they introduced me to her and said her last name. I'm like, that's an interesting last name. I haven't heard that. Oh, it's Hawaiian. Her ex-husband is Hawaiian. They just got a divorce. They have this child. He's a beautiful little boy, but yeah, they're going through divorce. It's kind of rough. So I just remember working with Connie all the time, and she was a little stern at times, but we got along great and everything was fine. And then one day she brought her son in, and I got to meet her son and everything, sweet little boy. And then I didn't think anything about, that again. And then I never went back there after I was done with my summer job. And then about 6 months ago, I saw on people.com, this picture showed up, and I'm like, hey, that's Connie. I remember Connie. She hasn't changed much. Why is she on People? And right next to her is her son, Jason Momoa.
Oh,
Whoa.
I met Jason Momoa when he was like 7 years old. Kid you not. It was, so she's from Norwalk. Yeah, he grew up in that area. So yeah, I worked with her. So that was crazy. Anyway, but I will say that was an interesting experience just because of all I saw. I'm surprised that I actually went into IT because of all the stress that I saw those people go through. But
there's still some of those around. I recall my previous job, that I only lasted 6 months at. It was like you'd get death marched on the support rotation, which is like, the overnight rotation. People just falling left and right, by the wayside. It was that same thing. It was like people be like, they were like an e-commerce company, and it was like, oh shit, why didn't people get their goods, shipped to them, or whatever? And it was like, well, they got to stay up all night and figure out this shipping problem, and so if people can get their stuff, so they don't get complaints. And yeah, it's some of that stuff's still around.
Yeah, for my first internship, like my first real internship, I actually did work with Ben and Chris. They were sort of my boss, I'd say. Yeah, I remember you're talking about that guy just totally like dogging on you about your code. That's funny because we used to do like pull requests, which people don't know is like review each other's code before we push them through. And I used to comment like as a joke on Ben's and Chris's pull requests is like, this is horrible. I guess it works, like approved, stuff like that. Man, no, my first internship was great.
So kind of on that same vein, Chris and Elmine, like I'd like to know more about when you were coming into like these jobs, like what was like your expectation, like Chris, like what was, you talked about like the 10 days or sorry, 10 hours a day, thing, but like how much time off did you get?
Oh boy, I think I probably got this wrong. I'm sorry, it's been so long ago. But I think we got 2 weeks and we
That'd
had
be
like
10 days, right? Not like
yeah,
14.
sorry.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, 10 days to start with. And then I think after 5 years it went up to 3. But what was interesting was we didn't have PTO per se. I mean, not like a PTO bucket where everything came out of it. There was a vacation time and then for those 10 days to start with. And then you had the sick bucket, which just kept going up like every pay period you earned. And like by the time I was done, I had like, I don't know, like 600 hours of sick time or something like that. It was ridiculous.
How much sick time did you get per? It was like an accrual based thing.
Yeah, it was an accrual, but I can't remember, to be honest. But it was just ridiculous. And everybody was commenting on it. I think not too long after that, they got rid of it because it didn't make any sense. It was just like, it was going up and up and up. And no, unless you had a serious problem, nobody was ever, making a dent in that sick bucket. When you talk about benefits, pay, one thing that was interesting was when I was starting, they differentiated between a 2-year degree and a 4-year degree. It was like, I want to say like a $4,000 to $6,000 difference if you got more, if you had a 4-year degree. So that was a big deal for me because I had that 4-year degree, but it wasn't programming. And then the 2-year degree in programming. So some places they wanted to just give me a 2-year. And I'm like, no, hey, I have a bachelor. But in the end, I got that. I got the 6,000, 7,000 extra bucks, which I think it bumped me from 22,000 to 28,000 or something like that.
28,000 was your first salary?
It was like 28,500, like that. Yeah, 28,500.
Yeah, now it's like starting's like, mid 70s, I guess, in the Midwest,
Yeah.
So, inflation's a bitch.
Did you just quick question, Chris? Did you guys talk about your guys' salaries to each other?
We were told specifically when we started that was grounds for termination, and you were not to speak about your salary.
Oh, really?
Which Ben has told me since that. I think, Ben, you have said since that is not legal.
That is not legal. That is correct.
Yes, we were told that very specifically, and so I was deathly afraid of anytime somebody would ask me like, "How much do you make?" I'm like, I can't say. I'll have to kill you."
Yeah, someone told me that at my the internship I worked with Ben and Chris with. Someone's like, "Yeah, don't discuss your pay with the other interns because IT interns get paid a few bucks more." And I was like, "Okay," and then I immediately went and told Ben.
And I was like, probably like tell everybody.
Yeah. I'll say that classmates one. He's getting paid, I think, like 80 base, which is, I think, is like the average in Iowa.
Sure.
And I know was sign-on bonus like a thing for you guys?
No, they didn't talk about that.
I think his is around like 6,000. I feel like that's really common nowadays. It's like there's a whole website called Levels at FYI. If anyone who's not in tech really go look at that, it's kind of cool to see. It's people just like talk about like post their salaries, what like offers they got and stuff. Nowadays it's like you get your base, but most of your stuff comes from your like vested stocks and then like a huge sign-on bonus. So it's like normally it's like 10 to like 20K with like a sign-on bonus you'd get. But yeah, that's kind of the comp stuff. I was expecting, at least for me, like personally, when I first got into the career field, I thought the comp would be like super high just because of those videos that I would watch. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get paid like 250K out of school, like the guy on the YouTube video. And then I was like, oh, I'm not gonna worry about like PTO because he only works 2 hours a day, so I can only work 2 hours a day. I don't need to take a day off. But yeah, that kind of changed a little bit. But
how much PTO, I guess, like did you expect coming into it too?
Honestly, I expected it to be like at least like I guess like around a month. I always thought it'd kind of be like snubbed somehow. Like at my current place, I don't think I have sick days. You can take a sick day, but you don't get paid for it. I think it goes through like your PTO bucket. But yeah.
Yeah, so at Polk County, at my very first job, we were excluded from like the union negotiations, but we did get like whatever that they got. And so whatever they bargained for ended up being like pretty good for it. They would get like pretty decent contracts. We got it was like 10 sick days, and then there was like 7 personal days, and then there was like 10 sick days too. So it ended up being like 27 days, approximately like a year. And it was accrual, which sucked. So like my very first month I worked there, I got like super sick, like on my very like last day, and I was like,
Oh,
oh my god, am I gonna get fired? Like I don't,
no.
I haven't like gotten the time yet, and it was all good, but yeah, that was very hard coming into it too, as like an accrual system. Very hard coming into with literally nothing, and you have to like accrue, and then the guy literally sitting next to me, has like he's losing sick time because he's his bucket's full, and vacation time too. He's like having to, it's just crazy how. And he was a much older guy, and so he also had the mindset of like, maybe Chris can relate, is like can't take any time off, like this
Right.
this
Right.
this I'm loyal to my company. And so yeah, it was totally weird. But yeah, I always kind of expected like around 20 days, 25 days ish is really good, I guess. And that's always been kind of my expectation. My very first job ever, I had like 3 days a year, and I don't know how anyone can ever operate like that at all. Like, you literally have to be like single, no kids, no responsibilities, no health issues,
Yeah.
nothing to do at all, which is nobody.
I can't believe I forgot this. When I was first hired, we were considered a probationary employee. And it was like, this is back when programmers are a dime a dozen, but you were a programmer analyst B, that you were considered probationary until you got to programmer analyst A, which I believe it was 6 months. I can't remember if it was 6 months or a year. If they decided that if you did not get promoted to A in that time period, then you were just automatically let go.
Wow. I feel like there was kind of like that probation period when I entered too. Like, and obviously I know it was different from job to job, but like I also kind of had that. I don't know like how like real it was, or if it was just like hey, is this guy getting it? Otherwise, like, we'll find a reason to fire him. But it was very much like that. And I feel like that's very much gone away too, is there's much more like, and maybe why, or the interview process, I guess, is kind of exploded in that the number of interviews. But like, I feel like that's kind of gone away. I don't know if Almeen, you can provide some color there
Oh,
too.
it's still there.
Okay.
It's still there. Yeah. You're looking at like minimum 3 interviews if you count the take-home test. Like, but I know someone that was interviewing for SpaceX, and it was I was gonna say like a whole work day, like at least 6 hours back to back to back to back to back coding problems.
But like,
It just did like test if you would break.
once they got in though, was it like, there was no probation period? It was like kind of like, you're one.
Yeah, that's what happens with interviews now. It's like you can pass that like stupid question over there. Yeah, you can do this job just fine. This job is not hard.
Yeah, and maybe that's like how companies, and have gotten away with it, is like they're like, yeah, we'll bring you in, you know, basically take a bunch of your time, not pay you for it, instead of doing like this probation period where they have to pay you.
Yeah, we were getting away from it, especially during like 2021 before the layoffs happened, and then now that's gone away. But it was coming to a point where developers were just like, yeah, I'm not going to do a LeetCode problem. Like, I'll sit and talk to you and explain my knowledge, but I'm not going to do this dumb test. But now we're back to it.
I have like a random ass question for you, Chris. There's very much like drama around refrigerators at work. Was that a thing back in the early 90s too? Like, people stealing other people's shit out of there, and Friday cleaning day once a month, like, was all those normal office problems back then?
I don't think they even had a refrigerator available at my first job.
How did people
So
bring
that
lunch?
you had a little ice pack in your cooler, and that's what I did. I just kept it at my desk. It had a little, no microwave. Yeah.
Do you even have a break room?
We had a cafeteria downstairs.
Hmm.
Did have a refrigerator, and yes, that was a huge problem. I never figured out who was taking people's desserts. But yes, it was a thing for sure. Yeah.
I was gonna say I was expecting at least catered meals every single day from. I almost spent a lot of lies, guys.
Okay, where did that come from?
I'm telling you, if I graduated 8 years ago in like 2016, that was the norm of the YouTube videos. You worked at a cool startup in the West Coast or East Coast, and you got your meals there, and you had your massages. And I don't even have free soda at my current place, so I don't know. Might unionize.